Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you. We're going to be reading one of our short stories from the book, The Power of Kindness, written by T.S. Arthur. So I think this is our fourth story that we're going to read, and it is titled A Noble Act. "What have you there, boys?" asked Captain Bland. "A ship," replied one of the lads who were passing the captain's neat cottage. "A ship, let me see." And the captain took the little vessel and examined it with as much fondness as a child does a pretty toy. "Very fair indeed. Who made it?" "I did," replied one of the boys. "You indeed. Do you mean to be a sailor, Harry?" "I don't know. I want father to get me into the Navy." "As a midshipman?" "Yes, sir." Captain Bland shook his head. "Better to be a farmer, a physician, or a merchant." "Why so, Captain?" asked Harry. "All these are engaged in the doing of things directly useful to society. But I am sure, Captain, that those who defend us against our enemies and protect all who are engaged in commerce from wicked pirates are doing what is useful to society." "Their use, my lad," replied Captain Bland, "is certainly a most important one, but we may call it rather negative than positive. The civilian is engaged in building up and sustaining society and doing good, through his active employment, to his fellowmen. But military and naval officers do not produce anything. They only protect and defend." "But if they did not protect and defend, Captain, evil men would destroy society. It would be of no use for the civilian to endeavor to build up if there were none to fight against the enemies of the state." "Very true, my lad. The brave defender of his country cannot be dispensed with, and we give him all honor. Still, the use of defense and protection is not so high as the use of building up and sustaining. The thorn that wounds the hand stretched forth to pluck the flower is not so much esteemed nor of so much worth as the blossom it was meant to guard. Still, the thorn performs a great use. Precisely a similar use does the soldier or naval officer perform to society, and it will be for you, my lad, to decide as to which position you would rather fill." "I never thought of that, Captain," said one of the lads, "but I can see clearly how it is. And yet I think those men who risk their lives for us in war deserve great honor. They leave their homes and remain away, sometimes for years, deprived of all the comforts and blessings that civilians enjoy, suffering frequently great hardships and risking their lives to defend their country from her enemies." "It is all you say," replied Captain Bland, "and they do so indeed deserve great honor. Their calling is one that exposes them to imminent peril and requires them to make many sacrifices. And they encounter not this peril and sacrifice for their own good, but for the good of others. Their lives do not pass so evenly as do the lives of men who spend their days in the peaceful pursuits of business, art, or literature, and we could hardly wonder if they lost some of the gentler attributes of the human heart. In some cases, this is so, but in very many cases, the reverse is true. We find the man who goes fearlessly into battle, and there, in defense of his country, deals death and destruction unsparingly upon her enemies, acting when occasion offers, from the most humane sentiments, and jeopardizing his life to save the life of a single individual. Let me relate to you a true story in illustration of what I say. When the unhappy war that was waged by the American troops in Mexico broke out, a lieutenant in the Navy who had a quiet berth at Washington felt it to be his duty to go to the scene of strife, and therefore asked to be ordered to the Gulf of Mexico. His request was complied with, and he received orders to go on board the steamer Mississippi, then about to sail from Norfolk to Vera Cruz. Soon after the Mississippi arrived out, and before the city and castle were taken, a terrible norther sprung up and destroyed much shipping in the harbor. One vessel, on which were a number of passengers, was thrown high above a reef, and when morning broke, the heavy sea was making a clear breach through her. She lay about a mile from the Mississippi, and it soon became known on board the steamer that a mother and her infant were in the wreck, and that unless succor came speedily, they would perish. The lieutenant of whom I speak immediately ordered out a boat's crew, and although the sea was rolling tremendously and the norther still blowing a hurricane, started to the rescue. Right in the teeth of the wind were the men compelled to pull their boat, And so slowly did they proceed that it took more than 2 hours to gain the wreck. At one time, they actually gave up, and the oars lay inactive in their hands. At this crisis, the brave but humane officer, pointing with one hand to the fortress of San Juan de Ayola, upon which a fire had already commenced, and with the other to the wreck, exclaimed with noble enthusiasm, "Pull away, men. I would rather save the life of that woman and her child than have the honor of taking the castle." Struck by the noble, unselfish, and truly humane feelings of their officer, the crew bent with new vigor to their oars. In a little while the wreck was gained, and the brave lieutenant had the pleasure of receiving into his arms the almost inanimate form of the woman, who had been lashed to the deck and over whom the waves had been beating at intervals all night. In writing home to his friends after the excitement of the adventure was over, the officer spoke of the moment when he rescued that mother and child from the wreck as the proudest of his life. Afterwards, he took part in the bombardment of Vera Cruz and had command in turn of the naval battery, where he faithfully and energetically performed his duty as an officer in the service of his country. He was among the first of those who entered the captured city, but pain, not pleasure, filled his mind, as he looked around and saw death and destruction on every hand. The arms of his country had been successful. The officer had bravely contributed his part in the work, but he frankly owns that he experienced far more delight in saving the woman he had borne from the wreck than he could have ever felt had he been the commander of the army that reduced the city. "Wherever duty calls, my lads," concluded the captain, "you will find that brave officer. He will never shrink from the post of danger if his country have need of him, nor will he ever be deaf to the appeal of humanity. But so long as he is a true man, just so long will he delight more in saving than in destroying." I'll see you for our next one. Bye-bye.